Showtime.
All right. Thank you for logging on to Focus Leadership in Extreme Contexts. We're going to be doing some questions through. If you have any questions, you can submit them through the chat box or the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on that and feeding them to our presenters. You can look for the recording in an email tomorrow, and we will also be inviting you to a follow-up dialogue called Self-Care for Leaders, where we will be breaking people into elementary, secondary, and central office Zoom subrooms, the breakout rooms, to talk about some of the strategies that you all have used to communicate with your communities, but also like take care of yourselves during this period. So yeah, at this point, I'm gonna turn you over to Dr. Mike Piccirillo, who's going to get us started.
Great. Well, thanks, Jay. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon. I'm up here at the WSWHE BOCES training facility in Wilton, New York, a little bit north of Saratoga Springs, and I did walk in with my mask and my gloves today because my wife makes me know, because it's the right thing to do. But I did come here, and I will go in and out with that. I just want to tell you, first of all, that the work that you're doing is so critically important for the children and the families that you serve. And I know how challenging it is. And that's why we're doing this webinar today. And I want you to know that your work is greatly appreciated and just so essential. So I am Mike Piccirillo. I'm the Executive Director of CASDA. And I'm introducing today's topic. And I wanted to start with a little quote out of a book that I just got yesterday, actually in the mail yesterday. I got a book that I ordered, Leadership in Turbulent Times. Maybe you can see that, maybe you can't. It's by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and she is noted for having written a number of books on 4 different presidents, actually. She's written books on Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson. And she talks about in this book, and I admittedly have not read the whole book, but I have read parts of it because I was really interested in it. And I thought Leadership in Turbulent Times, well, that's perfect for what we're going to be talking about today. But she talks about how they navigated these turbulent times in their particular presidencies and even before their presidencies. But I wanted to share with you an excerpt from the book that I thought was pretty appropriate for today. So if you wouldn't mind bearing with me, I'll read this to you. She says, scholars who have studied the development of leaders have situated resilience, the ability to sustain ambition in the face of frustration, at the heart of potential leadership growth. More important than what happened to them was how they responded to their reversals, how they managed in various ways to put themselves back together, how these watershed experiences at first impeded, then deepened, and finally and decisively molded their leadership. And I think that last part is really the key piece to me, is how these watershed experiences, and we are certainly going through a watershed experience in public education and really in life in general, but especially, I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in public education, certainly. We're dealing with a watershed moment. And although it may impede us initially, it's going to deepen our resolve, and in the end, it's going to decisively mold our leadership. And I think that's critically important to remember. So if you could go to the next slide. And that really kind of leads into this next slide, which really is about opportunity. And I use this slide often, and if you've been to any of my workshops or if you've been to any of the webinars where I've had an opportunity to talk, I typically will put this slide up because I think that we have to remind ourselves that with every impossible situation or seemingly impossible situation out there, we have to look at it as potential opportunity. And so I think it's important for us to always look at the positives and the things that we can get out of difficult situations. And the next slide, please. So this next slide, it's really about reframing and and really kind of refocusing our thinking. Because as much as we're all involved in the day-to-day operations, and it's gotten incredibly complex and difficult, much more so than ever, and it was always pretty complex, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. But what this particular quote reminds me of is that we need to look at the situation and say, when things get back to normal, whatever that is, what should that look like? And do we have an opportunity to perhaps change some things? Policies, practices, behaviors, cultures. Do we have the opportunity to change these things as the new normal as we go forward? And as leaders, we have to keep that 30,000-foot view, even though day to day we're being stressed by the ongoing rush of different issues that are coming our way. So it's really about keeping that 30,000-foot view. And next slide, please. And so, this I found this really interesting. This was on a wall in Hong Kong, and so, I think what's important is, again, to understand that where we are at now, in some respects, is a result of perhaps the normal that we were living in beforehand. And so it really should compel us to really think through where we want to go. And so I want to end, though, my part here by sharing another quote from the book from Doris Kearns Goodwin, Leadership in Turbulent Times. She says, while the nature of the era a leader chances to occupy profoundly influences the nature of the leadership opportunity, the leader must be ready when that opportunity presents itself. And I think it's really important that we take stock of where we're at right now as leaders and how are we going to move forward. That's key. And so I'm going to turn over the webinar to Dale Ghetto, and Dale's a member of our CASA faculty and a longtime administrator and educator, and she's going to really walk you through some of the things that we can be doing as leaders in order to ultimately make this experience one in which we grow and come out of the other side to a better place. So Dale, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Here I am getting to know you. Here's today's agenda. What's going on here? What the research says specific to trust and building, trust building and communication. And then we're going to end with now what. As Mike said, I'm new to the CASDA faculty, and typically if I were in the room with you today, I would open up and we would do a strength building session, a community building session, but since we're all across the Capital Region and beyond, I'm just going to start by sharing out a little bit who's in the room today. So there are principals in the room, there are assistant principals in the room, there are business leaders in the room, and there are directors of PPS in the room. People who administer learning, people who administer buildings. So some of the districts, Waynesburg is in the room, give a shout out, Mohan. Kingston is in the room, Gloversville, Fort Edward, Shen, and many other districts. And echoing what Mike said, I want to please give you my utmost respect and really heartfelt care right now, because what's going on is nothing we've experienced before. But hopefully today you'll learn a few things. Well, nothing really new, but really what we're going to put our focus on, and hopefully learn a few things and grow from there. We're going to start with crisis. All right, we're going to differentiate. Doris Kearns Goodwin was talking about, extraordinary times and really tests. And so many of us have experienced crisis in buildings. We've had deaths of faculty members. We've had any number of isolated incidents. And really what I have to say about that is that crisis typically depends on the research. Some 3 phases, 4 phases, but it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And certainly we grow from what we learn. And in this scene, this is from obviously The Office, and the title of the episode is "Smoking is Going to Save Lives." And Dwayne feels that people really need to learn from experience. And as I mentioned, we've had those experiences. We've been in crisis situations before, but there's really nothing that we've ever experienced quite like this as leaders, as a nation, as a world, quite frankly. There's not a large body of research out there in extreme leadership situations, but I think what's really important about what Hannah here has to say is really take a look. The magnitude of this event is really almost intolerable if you really think about it, on the psychological effects, the material consequence, specifically to our students. I think it's really important to remember that that it affects everybody, and I want to talk, including you as leaders. We've all been on the airplane, and I've been to several of the CASDA webinars, and an earlier presenter used this. And so we're navigating extremely treacherous, difficult times, but it's about taking care of yourself first. I'll give you an example. Unfortunately, I too have had the experience of losing faculty and staff and kids, really all at one time. And so I found what was helpful for me is I would come home literally and watch cartoons, turn the sound off and watch cartoons. I know a lot of you in the room, and I know how important your family is to you. So what are you doing to take care of yourself? Are you putting your mask on first so you're available for your family, for your faculties, for your students? I can say here now that there's nobody who knows how you feel but you. But it is so critical to take care of yourself. Put your mask on first. Just a reminder, and I know we went through school and we know about this, but really your faculty, your students, your staff, your community, depend on the largesse of your community, is in all sorts of different places. So when we're expecting our students to log on and learn at 9 o'clock in the morning, it may be difficult. And I would say the same thing for some teachers and support staff. We have no idea when our faculty and staff comes to school, what they're leaving behind. So again, important to be attentive to where everybody is on the hierarchy. So again, I'll go back for a minute, put your mask on first, be sensitive and aware of where everybody is as you come out and lead yourself every day. And then my final reminder before I get into a little bit more specifics is really about equity. And I want you to take a minute, because I mentioned briefly the impact this event is having on our most vulnerable is painstaking. And I'm afraid that the gap for some of our kids' learning, emotional development will be even wider. But I want you to take a minute and I want you to think about who your most vulnerable students are and what you think the greatest impact that this is going to have on them in terms of their material well-being, psychological. Take about 10 seconds. All right, if we were all in the room together, at this point, I'd say, turn and talk to your neighbor. So turn, well, I'm only kidding, and talk to yourself. As I mentioned earlier, there's nothing new in leadership. It's the focus and where the focus where you have to take yourself through this extreme event. Again, we talked a little bit about equity. I'm looking at the standards, for educational leaders. It talks about equity. And most importantly, the remainder of today's presentation, really the focus will be around standard 2, ethics and professional norms, that you lead with interpersonal and communication skill, social emotional insight, and the understanding of all students and staff members' backgrounds and cultures. So, as leaders do not have a choice about whether or not to communicate. They only have a choice about how to manage what they communicate. So the good news is that you can manage it, and that there's research out there that points out what influences your crises. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of the research came out of crises management, and very little on extreme, but I suspect that we'll learn a lot more coming out of this. So, 3 factors. Disposition. That's what you already are. This is from your background, your personal qualities, your experiences, your values, your beliefs, your skills, your conception of leadership. Are you a servant leader? Are you a distributive leader? You come into this situation with a disposition, and you come into this situation with already pre-made relationships. When I go back to the crisis slide, they talk about the pre-crisis. So this is it. You already have existing relationships with people in your building. But the third factor, situational, you are able to modify and change and grow. That's the opportunity in this. That's the situation. And it's important, really, how leaders assess the situation as it unfolds, understanding the context, being aware, of different responses, making timely decisions, adapting to changing needs, making use of resources, providing directions, responding flexibly, thinking creatively, and constantly reappraising your options. So you have control of this. And we've also, I like that Mike read from a historian's point of view, because we've all had experiences with leaders. And so I'd like you to take a moment and think through any leaders who are examples of positive leaders who adapt to the change, as well as non-examples, leaders who are not making timely decisions. I'll just take a moment, another 10 seconds, and get some ideas of leaders in your mind who's moving forward, who can do this, and ones that you've had questions about. There's an opportunity in this situation. There's an opportunity in terms of your relationships. It's the quality of the relationship that ultimately makes the difference, especially when the leader defines his or her relationships with subordinates as transactional, emotionally distant, level 1 role relationship, or, and here's the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, or attempts to create a more personal level 2 relationship that's designed to be more open and trusting. And so if we go back to the 3 factors influencing your communication style, dispositional, relational, or situational, this is where the opportunity exists to move from maybe a manager, but to move into a more trusting relationship. There's good news too, because there's some points on how to do this in the research. There are 2 shifts that have to take place to have a deeper relationship. 1, you have to shift the focus on yourself to a focus on others and the collective community. And the second shift is the focus from self-preservation and protection of learning and growing together as a community. And so I know in the room there are a lot of young leaders, there are non-tenured leaders in the room, and I know pre-COVID-19, maybe you were going about your business one way, but it is critical to take care of the people in front of you and to form more trusting relationships. Again, going back to the time that it is, where people are, it's what's most important. All right, so here are some specific behaviors that that you can undertake when you're trying to improve your relationship when communicating. Honesty. Now that doesn't mean breaching confidentiality or saying things in a less timely manner, but being as honest as you humanly can. Benevolence, giving grace. People are not going to be able to perform maybe at a level that they used to. Maybe you had a stellar teacher, and now with the challenges and the change in teaching, is really struggling online, is really struggling, missing that interpersonal communication. Open, saying I'm sorry, saying when you made a mistake, and going back and fixing it and making it better. Reliable, can people count on you? And competence. And so again, this is a new situation, and being competent in this situation is a struggle at times. And you heard Mike and Jerome, or I think it was Jerome, mention that we're going to have some breakout sessions moving forward. And I think it would be important if, you know, to kind of as a check-in. Right, I go back to equity right now. I have been in communication with people really across the Capital Region and beyond. And in terms of getting instruction started, and parents, and certainly as well, getting instruction started, and then how to balance the fact that some students are not going to be available for instruction, whether that means emotionally, physically, and then having to balance where I've heard some things, well, are we going to stop instruction for 80% when the 20%? And so I just urge you to check in with your colleagues, to not lose sight of the big picture, because it's very hard. Things change quickly, crisis, people move, your adrenaline starts going. And Mike talked about it, getting back on the balcony, so to speak. And again, I don't think anybody has lived what you are living right now. And so these are reminders, these are some takeaways. And again, do not forget that, that you were hired because you were a good fit and you can do this job. But there are some things really to consider. And so what are you doing to develop trust? Leadership in extreme context magnifies your disposition. As I mentioned, it really puts a spotlight on your prior relationships, but you can grow, you can change, and you can modify your prior actions. You can come out of a situation like this. How do I say this? If you were struggling in certain areas before this and you continue along the same path, you're going to struggle. But if you struggled before and you just open your mind and get feedback and make some conscious changes, you can really grow and be a head-turning leader and really change some expectations for yourself and that others may have had of you. But you can do that. You can build trust. So again, this is my first webinar, so to speak, and so we put some plans together, and I'm definitely not going to go the entire hour. And so I'm going to open this up right now. We still have a little ways to go, but I want to get people, and so I know you're all online, and I don't want to waste your time. I know you spend all day looking at a screen, but I think it would be important to hear from some of you, all of you for that matter, in the audience. And so if you would take a look at your chat box, your chat, it's up on the top right of your screen. And I'm going to give about 5 minutes for folks to focus. I want to hear from you what you're doing in your buildings, in your departments, in your schools, in your districts for those two-way communication opportunities. And what you can share is there are people out there, by way of example, a principal every morning at 9 o'clock says the Pledge of Allegiance and opens up their school community that way. I see teachers online every day reading to their class at 2 o'clock. What are you doing right now that's working for you? And if you'll take 5 minutes, and if I had a timer, you'd see it, but please start. I see some of them starting to come up. Send them to all participants on the screen, and we'll take about 5 minutes.
Just make sure that your chat setting says to all panelists and attendees, and then everybody can see it, and you can share with all your colleagues. Thanks.
Great question, Nicole. I can see a panel, a participant is having focus groups. Are they newly established focus groups for this particular event? All right. going to move on from this. Jerome will collect all that and we'll send that back out to you moving forward. I asked the question about professional development because crises are especially significant in culture creation and transmission, because the heightened emotional involvement during such periods increases the intensity of learning. I saw, Nicole, you had a question about reducing staff anxiety. I'm suspecting that there's an awful large learning curve going on with technology, with assessment, and so many things. And it does increase the need and intensity for learning. Crisis heightens anxiety, and their need to reduce anxiety is a powerful motivator for new learning. And so what sorts of new focused learning do you need to do? What does your faculty and staff need to do? Students, parents, and then how can CASTA assist? So at this point, this concludes the content area. I can go over and review a couple of points, and then it'll conclude, and I will stay on for some questions. Please remember to put your oxygen mask on first. We're running a marathon here, and so your energy needs to be in place for the long haul. Equity is as important during these times, if ever before. I think you can turn the television on and see how people are hungry and really, really in need. Again, you don't have a choice to communicate. That's a good question, Mike, about being vulnerable. You don't have a choice to communicate, but how does that feel and work, and how do you do that when you yourself are vulnerable? So I think just a final reminder that you can change, that you can communicate, form relationships. And I'm reading the text box as I'm going across, and really grow from this situation. So that really concludes today's presentation. And there we are. I'd like to say goodbye from here. I'll stay on and take any questions. Jerome, Mike will stay on with me. Everybody, good luck. Take care of yourself. Jerome, you want to remind them one more time about next week?
Yeah, so next week on Thursday at this time, 1 week from today, we'll be doing a session, like a facilitated dialogue, where we break people into the Zoom breakout rooms, and we're going to discuss some of the communication strategies and some self-care practices. You'll all be able to interact with each other in a much, a smaller group, so that way you can actually speak, and the microphone reverb is not unmanageable. Yeah, really appreciate you guys sharing the experience that you're having. I understand it,
I
sort
can't
of
imagine.
So, but we appreciate you guys, what you shared, and appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of, your students and communities. So you can look for a recording. You can feel free to share the slides with your colleagues, or with your teachers. Anyone who you feel like would benefit from it, we'd be happy for you to share it with them. And you can always reach out to us via email if you have any questions, or if you need anything. We'll try our best to support you. All right, so thank you.
I'd like to just jump in real quickly, and if I'd like Nicole's question, and if she's still out there, how do you manage anxiety with staff with the current budget crisis looming? And I think, there's no easy answer to that, other than to say that you have to deal with what you can, right? You can only control what you can control. And I think in your responses, being empathetic and being supportive, and also being consistent with whatever information that you can provide. And I understand that when it comes to budgets, in a normal season, it's difficult to share all the information that is available. And in this particular budget season, it's obviously much more complex than ever. So, but if there is information that you can share, you share it honestly and consistently. But I think really it's, control what you can control. And those are the things that, are happening right now. And the budget will ultimately have to play itself out to some degree. And we don't always have a lot of control over all of those things. So I think, take people's minds off of that as much as possible, and keep their focus on the work at hand, because ultimately that's what they can control.
Yeah. Is there anybody out there who has had like some particular success communicating with families that, were maybe initially having some trouble getting connected, that you could share some strategies for that? Not sure.
Shy group.
No, it's a long day.
Yes,
Long day.
yes, yes. All right. All right.
Well,
Well,
okay, there we got direct
Jen.
calls. Devices. It's good. That's good.
Oh, good. Thank you, April.
A question that I would throw out there to people who are still on with us is, do you want us to provide you a space for more of a conversation-like atmosphere, less presentation and more just opportunity to interact and talk? Because we'd love to do that, and that's what our goal is for next Thursday. But we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. So if you could give us some feedback on that, that would be great.
Julie, I think you had your hand raised, so I tried to.
Yeah, I was struggling. Hi, I was just struggling on how to figure out how to work this one.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Dale. How are you?
Good. Good to hear your voice.
You as well. Good to see you. I guess I was just going back to the last question that you asked about if we've had any success in, contacting families and our students, and it's been a real struggle. But I would say that in my school in particular, we've reached every single family, and we went around, over, under. We did things that we would never do in an ordinary circumstance to reach parents. So, and I think people are sharing that information on how we were successful, different things that we've done in the district. But it's been a struggle, and I'm sure for everybody.
So, Julie, how do we get what you're doing out to the greater, the greater group? I know Albany has a pretty, big but tight-knit group, and if you're having success, how do we learn from you to share out with our other colleagues?
I'm not quite sure. People probably could just share all the things that they've done and tried. And I know, most of the things that have worked for us really has been the communication in between the other schools that have siblings of our students, finding different numbers, finding emergency contacts of those other siblings that weren't in our system, for my student. Just those roundabout ways that people had success, surprisingly, were the things that really have helped. But I think just having people share their surprising techniques that worked, that they had success with, might be good.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think for the long haul, Julie? Like, the adrenaline, I was going to talk about 12/7 and Friday the 13th. And those are adrenaline shots in crisis. But what do you think people need to keep going? This is going to be months, perhaps.
I wish I knew. I think that I could probably speak for everybody that this is very draining, but in a very different way that we've never experienced before.
Right.
Because you add the isolation on top of everything else. And a lot of what we do as leaders is collaboration with, whether it be with our faculty or and staff or with each other. And it is much harder right now to do that, even when we have these, virtual meetings. And you're exhausted in a much different way.
Yeah, I can't imagine, Jules, and we've been pretty exhausted over the years, but I just cannot imagine the impact. Yeah. And so I think that we don't want to waste people's time, because that's the other piece is that, as I understand, that you guys just meet and meet kind of sounds like when we were first starting out, just everybody finding their footing. So we want to put something meaningful together and not waste really anybody's time in the process.
Dale, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So there's two things I wanted to mention. Julie, it's good to hear your voice as well. This highlights, I think, especially for those of us who've been teaching in the disadvantaged areas of education, the importance of building those relational connections with our students and their families, and finding out, who's auntie and who's the cousin and who's this and the third, because sometimes those are ways we're the kids that are non-traditional. The school to, contact may be off, but I know that he's the brother of a sister of a this, that, or the third, and we're able to get in touch with kids because we have those deeper connections as administrators as well as classroom teachers. So I think that's some of it as well. And then from the managerial side of that, it also highlighted for us the lack of sometimes bad data that we had on our kids. And so, institute some type of a system where we're updating those contacts and phone numbers and such on a more regular basis. Because I think the one shot a year may work in suburban areas like, for my kids, but our populations, for a good portion of them, they're very transient, which means their phone numbers change and their addresses change. And we've got to try to keep up with them, almost make it a part of our standard operating procedure. If we have a parent in for a 504 or whatever, asking them in the moment, are these your correct contact information? You know what I'm saying? And make that a part of our practice.
Right.
We're,
and I would imagine, Nicole, so much happens in a day, because I keep thinking, Julie, when there were bins of mail in the house offices, right? We've been talking about it, and now we're at a crisis point when it really is so important, Nicole. And so I'm wondering if, Mike, in the beginning of your slide, it's not going to be the same. Would you start to change some priorities? You run at the speed of light, Nicole. And so, but now you hit a wall and you really need something else. And, those are all good points, but I also think, we remember in September, and by November we forget that was really an important thing. So
absolutely.
So how do you keep that front and center? And do you speak truth to power? Do you say, we're going to cross all these things off the list because this is what we really need right now? I don't know. I don't have that answer. I've struggled for years trying to figure out what urgent and important really is in this work. So.
Dale, some of the things that are kind of keeping me going, I know Nicole's probably equally excited when it happens, is there's been a couple silver lining things that have already started to show themselves. Like, for example, students who were not attending regularly or doing any work have started to tear it up online and are really being successful, which, really shows that we're not meeting the needs of these students in a traditional classroom. And the other, oh crap, I think I just forgot the other one. Oh, no, teachers have grown so much already with the use of technology, where they never could really get themselves to push themselves into Google Classroom or to do something. They're really finding it exciting and seeing the uses for it when we get back. So we would have a much more engaging, classes when we do get back to a regular platform.
So Julie, you're not the first to say that, that kids they never expected were engaged, and sometimes at 11 o'clock at night.
Mhm.
And so I know you have a night school program. Has there been any talk about really looking at, like, it's probably too early, what that looks like for those kids coming out of this, having a space for them to continue to learn like that, if that's what they're, the most engaged?
I'm hoping something like that does come out of this, because the more good things that come out of it will make everybody feel better about this whole happening. But I
Really,
think that,
maybe some choice around learning and how
Yeah.
the kids want to learn.
Mhm. Yes.
Julie, I think you made some great points about the opportunities that are out there, and they're being uncovered as we go along right now. And so let's not waste those opportunities, right? I hope that we do change some things, and that the new normal is different, because it needs to be. We need to meet our kids' needs, and we all have to be honest that all of our kids' needs were not being met in the traditional setting. So let's look at these new settings and see what we can do with them to ultimately maximize the opportunity to meet students' needs. So I hope that that's what schools do, and I hope that's where we go with the situation and make the best of it.
I
Yeah,
do as well.
yep.
If anybody has anything that you want to say or share with your colleagues, just like there's like a raise your hand function, and I can turn your mic on.
Bueller. That's my favorite movie.
Man, it's a deep cut.
All right. All right.
Right.
So Nicole, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Well, good luck, Nicole. Really, that the question I feel for you. I know the people that you're working with, and I can't imagine that on top of what's going on. So I really, if there's anything I can do, give me a call, whatever. I know, or come
Be
next
careful
week.
what you ask for, Dale. I do have your
Yeah.
number still.
I know, right? Or come next week. That would be great. Julie too. Really, you add so much, and you're not shy. And so we'd love to hear. I'd love to have you back next week if you can make it. And there'll be CTLE credit too.
Excellent.
Right.
All right, everybody. Well, be well, and
Thank you
hopefully
so
we'll talk
much.
with you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jules.
Take care.
Bye, Nicole.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Bye, Alex. Bye, Sharon. Bye, Maria, sorry. Lawrence. Hi, Lawrence. Let's share our playlist. All right.